Welcome to the Holy Land in this biblical site of the Garden of Gethsemane. This is a most beautiful sight, a most precious time, a time when we reflect upon what Christ did as he began his suffering. Right here in the Garden of Gethsemane is where he began his suffering that would end on the cross some 20 hours later. So let's look at it together. So once again, we're in the Garden of Gethsemane, and Gethsemane means press. It means an absolute press, and you can see in this video an olive press. So a Gethsemane is actually the weight, the heavy stone or the roller rock that actually crushes. It could be olives, different things that they crush, but Gethsemane means press. It's the rock that presses and crushes the different things, and mainly olives is what they use for. So right here in this Garden of Gethsemane was an olive press. That's why it's called the Garden of Gethsemane, Garden of the Olive Press right here. And as a result, this area right here became known as the Garden of Gethsemane. We're in an olive orchard here. You can see the olive trees here. So this Mount of Olives, which is just really loaded with olive trees. In fact, Christ came down the triumphal entry, and then the Garden of Gethsemane is just right at the base of the Mount of Olives, in between the Mount of Olives and then the Temple Mount where the temple was. So it became known as the Garden of Gethsemane. And how fitting it would be called Gethsemane, because it means press. And here Christ would be pressed beyond measure, even to the point of sweating great drops of blood. And the blood that he sweat was not just the physical torment that he was seeing, that he would endure, but he was also seeing and beginning to feel the weight of the sins of the world being placed upon him. All of the sins of mankind he would bear on the cross, and he would become our sacrificial lamb, the Passover lamb. The next day he would be crucified on the cross. So he was in the Garden of Gethsemane Thursday evening, and then Friday, the Passover day, he would be crucified. He would be hung on the cross at 9 in the morning. At noon, it would be black until 3 o'clock. The sun would be darkened. Supernaturally, God darkened it. And so at 3 o'clock is when Christ died on the cross. And that was the exact same time that the sacrificial lamb, the Passover lamb, would be sacrificed as well at the temple. So how fitting that Christ, our Passover lamb, would die at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the exact time that the Passover lamb for the people would be sacrificed as well. So from right here, he begins his torment that lasted for some 20 hours. And in order to provide you with a more scenic and more pleasurable experience, we're filming this in an olive grove just right beside the traditional site of the Garden of Gethsemane. And you'll be able to see in this video some other photos and media of the traditional site of the Garden of Gethsemane. The traditional site of the Garden of Gethsemane is located at the base of the Mount of Olives, which is in between the Temple Mount, where the original temple was, and the Mount of Olives, and there's really no reason to dispute its location. Some of the olive trees in this garden are close to 2,000 years old, so they could have witnessed all the events that took place on that dark, cold night before Christ's crucifixion. The Church of All Nations, which is built here by the Garden of Gethsemane, is officially named the Basilica of the Agony. It's located at the foot of the Mount of Olives, right in Jerusalem next to the Garden of Gethsemane. This Catholic church enshrines a section of stone in the Garden of Gethsemane that is believed to be where Christ prayed on the night of his arrest in Matthew 26:36. The modern church stands on the foundations of two ancient churches, a 4th century Byzantine basilica destroyed by an earthquake in 746 AD, and a 12th century Crusader chapel which was abandoned in 1345 AD. The Church of All Nations, or otherwise known as the Basilica of the Agony, was built from 1919 to 1924 with funding from 12 different countries. This is what gave it its nickname, the Church of All Nations. Jesus spent his last evening on earth right here in the Garden of Gethsemane. And here he prayed before his crucifixion that would take place the following day. And in Luke 12:50 it says, This is Christ praying, I have a baptism to be baptized with, and how great is my distress until it is accomplished. And Christ sweat great drops of blood right here as he prayed and prepared for his crucifixion. Matthew 26:36 says, Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, Sit here while I go over there and pray. And taking with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, James and John, he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch with me. And going a little further, he fell on his face and prayed, saying, My Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. And he came to the disciples and found them sleeping. And he said to Peter, So you could not watch with me even 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. And here we see a most profound example of Christ praying as the temptation of trying to escape and maybe considering not going to the cross befell him. So what an example for us in our times of need, our times of temptation, as he said to Peter, watch and pray, for the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. So